This is the story of a cruel landowner who wanted to burn an old worthless map and a humble librarian who risked everything to save it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty estate of Villa Dorada when Don Leonardo Mendoza decided to clean out his grandfather's old study. As the wealthiest landowner in the region, he had little patience for what he considered useless old junk cluttering his magnificent mansion. Aurelio Santos had worked as the village librarian for 30 years. His salary barely covered rent for his tiny apartment, but his love for books, maps, and historical documents was immeasurable. At 62, with silver hair and gentle eyes behind worn spectacles, he had dedicated his life to preserving knowledge that others might discard. That afternoon, Don Leonardo discovered a collection of old papers in his grandfather's wooden chest. Among them was a faded, cracked parchment, covered with what appeared to be random lines, symbols, and Spanish words he couldn't understand. "Aurelio," Don Leonardo called when the librarian arrived to catalog some books. "Look at this worthless scribbling. My grandfather must have been senile when he kept this garbage." Aurelio's heart skipped as he examined the document. The parchment was clearly centuries old, with distinctive 17th century Spanish handwriting and cartographic symbols that suggested something extraordinary. "Don Leonardo, this appears to be a very old map. Perhaps we should study it more carefully before..." "Study it?" The landowner laughed cruelly. "It's illegible nonsense. I'm going to burn it tonight with the rest of this trash, unless..." His eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. "You want to buy this treasure from me?" Aurelio felt his pulse quicken. Something about the map's age, the quality of the parchment, and the faded Spanish text suggested it might be historically significant. "How much would you want for it?" "Let's say 500 pesos. More than fair for worthless paper that's heading to the fireplace anyway." It was everything Aurelio had saved for his retirement. But watching Don Leonardo prepare to destroy what could be a priceless historical artifact was unbearable. "I accept," Aurelio said quietly, his hands trembling as he counted out his life savings. Don Leonardo laughed as he pocketed the money. "You're even more foolish than I thought, old man. You just bought expensive kindling. Have you ever risked everything to save something others considered worthless?" That night, Aurelio spread the map carefully on his kitchen table under a bright lamp. Using a magnifying glass, he began decoding the faded Spanish text and mysterious symbols. What he discovered made his hands shake with excitement. The map was dated 1687 and signed by Captain Eduardo Vasquez of the Spanish colonial forces. It detailed the location of a gold mine that had been sealed and hidden during an indigenous uprising. The Spanish text described El Tesoro Perdido de la Montaña Sagrada, the lost treasure of the sacred mountain. For weeks, Aurelio researched in historical archives, cross-referencing the map with colonial records. Everything confirmed his suspicions. This was authentic documentation of a lost Spanish gold mine worth millions. Working with university archaeologists, Aurelio organized an expedition to the location marked on the map. Deep in the mountains behind Don Leonardo's estate, they found exactly what the map promised: a sealed mine entrance hidden behind centuries of vegetation. The discovery was extraordinary. The mine contained not only gold deposits, but also Spanish colonial artifacts, indigenous treasures, and historical documents that rewrote local history. Archaeologists declared it one of the most significant historical finds in the region. Your support helps us share more stories about the triumph of wisdom over ignorance. News of the discovery spread quickly. Museums worldwide wanted to acquire pieces from the collection. The government declared the site a National Historical Monument, with Aurelio receiving substantial compensation as the discoverer and a percentage of all artifacts recovered. Within months, the humble librarian had become wealthy beyond his dreams. But more importantly, he had preserved an invaluable piece of history for future generations. Don Leonardo learned about the discovery when reporters arrived at his estate. His face turned red with rage when he realized he had sold a treasure map for 500 pesos. "That map belonged to my family," he raged. "I demand it back." "You sold it legally," Aurelio replied calmly when Don Leonardo confronted him. "You called it worthless scribbling and were about to burn it. I'll sue you. I'll take everything." But the law was clear. Don Leonardo had sold the map willingly, even mocking its value. He had no legal claim to the discovery. Months later, Don Leonardo's financial situation deteriorated. Bad investments and the humiliation of losing a family treasure had damaged his reputation. Meanwhile, Aurelio used his newfound wealth to establish a historical preservation foundation, ensuring that important documents would never again face destruction due to ignorance. The old map was eventually displayed in a museum with a plaque reading, "Donated by Aurelio Santos, who understood that today's trash might be tomorrow's treasure." Years later, when Don Leonardo, now much humbler, visited the museum, he found Aurelio studying ancient documents in the research section. "I came to apologize," Don Leonardo said quietly. "My grandfather always said that map was special, but I was too arrogant to listen." Aurelio looked up kindly. "Your grandfather was a wise man. He preserved this map for decades, knowing someone would eventually understand its value. Why didn't you gloat when you became wealthy? Why didn't you mock me like I mocked you?" "Because," Aurelio smiled gently, "true treasure isn't gold or land. It's knowledge, wisdom, and the humility to recognize value where others see only worthless paper." Don Leonardo nodded slowly. Perhaps you could teach me to read old documents? I have more papers from my grandfather's collection." And so began an unlikely partnership between the former enemies, one that led to several more historical discoveries and a friendship built on mutual respect for preserving the past. Remember this lesson. What appears worthless to ignorant eyes might be invaluable to those who understand its true significance. Never mock those who see treasure in what you consider trash, for they might be the guardians of wisdom you cannot comprehend.